Welcome to the ChargePoint podcast, brought to you by Flexecharge, your gateway to the future of EV charging. In each episode, we dive deep into the world of EV infrastructure, offering insights and perspectives from industry leaders, innovators, and the people at the forefront of deploying charging solutions and networks. Join us to explore the exciting developments that are accelerating our world towards sustainable mobility.
And welcome to a new episode of the ChargePoint podcast, episode 17, where we take a deep dive into one of the world's most advanced EV charging market, if not the most advanced EV charging market, Norway. Norway has led the way in electric mobility, with nearly 90% of new cars sold being electric at the end of last year. But what's behind this success, and how especially did the EV charging market evolve in parallel to the number of EVs on the streets, which was rising? Are there any lessons that the rest of the world can learn from? And as the market matures, I'll discuss with our guests what challenges still lie ahead. To dive into these topics, I have the pleasure to welcome three expert guests in the hot seat. Wenche Teigland. After 25 years in the energy industry, she went on and founded Found Energy, an innovative CPMS. She shares insights on the transition from private to fleet charging and how Norway's charging infrastructure must adapt to meet the needs of commercial EVs. Niels Dolum, an industry veteran and former ChargePoint operator in Denmark. He was also present in the episode about the Danish market. He will take us through Norway's early adoption, the role of utilities and oil companies in building the charging network, and why foreign players struggle to enter the market. Andreas Kirgerud, senior manager at EY Norway, specialist of the e-mobility industry, breaks down the latest trends in fast charging, the rise of electric trucks and commercial fleets, and the exciting potential and surprising potential of harbour charging for Norway's extensive maritime industry. Together, we'll tackle key questions. Why has Norway been so consistent in its EV policies? Why is fast charging becoming more critical despite a strong home charging culture? And how can Norway maintain its leadership as other countries catch up? So plug in, stay tuned, and let's explore the past, present, and future of EV charging in Norway. Let's get started. In this episode, we're going to dive into the Norwegian EV charging market with the various experts. And the first one to sit in the hot chair today is Wenche from Found. Welcome, Wenche.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for taking the time. So as usual, we, of course, want to start with your backstory, your origin story. So can you tell us a bit about your journey from graduation and how it took you to start Found, please?
Thank you. I graduated almost 3 decades ago and as a mechanical engineer, actually, and worked for the first 14 years in the oil and gas sector in Norway. But a little bit after 2000, I moved into the renewables. And for many years, I had executive positions within renewable energy, infrastructure, and so forth. Some years ago, around 2020, I decided it was time to do something else. And I left. At that time, I was the CEO of one of the largest grid companies in Norway. And I left the company and started as a small investor, also having some board positions, and then slowly moved into the Found organization. And we were working then at a research project for the Norwegian Research Council regarding looking at the ecosystem for the charging, for the EV mobility in Norway, which was at that point moving quite fast.
Oh yes, 2020, that's 5 years ago, but in Norway you were full speed already at that time, yeah? You've always been ahead of the rest of Europe and the world. Very interesting. So just curious about the kind of companies you were investing in or on the boards. Did some of the companies inspire you for building what you're building today? I mean, or what kind of space were those startups in that you were investing in or helping?
Well, for the charging industry, in my executive position, I had from 2014 actually. I worked at the company which today is named Evini, and I
Oh, yes,
probably
of
know
course.
Evini Charging.
Absolutely.
They were one of the first movers in the Norwegian market around 2013,
There were.
2014. We actually built the biggest charging station in Northern Europe was here in Bergen, where I'm located. And that
Nice.
was open, I think, around 2015. So
Absolutely.
I've kind of been following the charging business for a very long time.
Absolutely.
But after COVID in 2020, 2021, when the penetration of EVs in Norway was getting quite high, there was a lot of issues emerging when everyone was not allowed to go abroad for summer holidays, but
Hmm.
decided to spend the summer holidays in Norway. And they were driving their EVs up north and east and west and so forth. And the charging issues suddenly became a big problem.
Interesting. Yeah, how
That's
COVID
where we
pushed.
started.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it was revealing kind of the weaknesses even on the Norwegian charging market itself. Yeah, very interesting. So, so tell us now. Let's hone in on Found. So what was the idea behind Found, right? I think the CPMS market is, of course, exciting and started some years ago. And it's very competitive landscape, I would say, today. So tell us about, when it was started, what was the idea and how has it evolved into what it is today?
Yeah. We launched MVP in the winter of 2023. And the commercial idea then was to launch a sharing platform for chargers where everyone could easily unload their chargers, make an account, and make it available for public charging. The idea was good because there was so many chargers out there who was not open for the public. It was not utilized, and in Norway, in the residential market, there are over 400,000 chargers, which is maybe used just once or twice a week. So that's where we started. We wanted to increase the utilization of critical infrastructure. And at the same time, make the owners a little revenue stream to go along with the
It's
sharing of the charges.
brilliant idea. And I think it's funny to see that some brilliant ideas are in the air and grabbed by people. You grabbed it, and I remember in Denmark, Monta had the same idea when they started. Absolutely, yeah.
So 2023, we tested it, we piloted it, a lot of customers in the market, learned a lot, developed the platform further, and moving into 2024, we were working with kind of all customer segments. And that was quite challenging, having such a broad segmentation of customers. And we also saw that the owners of e-fleets were moving quite fast, and they had different problems they needed to solve than the residential EV driver. So we decided last summer to focus on fleets alone. And we can talk more about that, why we think that is very important. It is a low margin business very often, and the
Absolutely.
charging operation is kind of a hustle for them. And they
Yes.
need the cars rolling on the roads
Yes. It's a
24/7
cost.
if they can. Yeah.
Yes, it's a cost. It's a hassle. So you need a very strong, charging strategy as a
Yeah.
fleet.
So we are taking care of the charging logistic for the fleet, offering them a platform where they can have access to chargers, and also bringing along automatic payment reimbursement solutions. You can charge at home, or you can charge along the road, or at the home station for the company, or a depot charging.
Right.
And now we are about to launch a planning and booking solution for the more heavy duty vehicle fleets as well. So we have quite a fixed plan for where we are heading.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're positioning for the next growth phase with the heavy duty. That's really interesting. How many people are working today at Found? Just to have an idea, for our listeners?
We are still a small organization. We are around 8 people and also have some students to help us in between.
All right.
We
But
are
that's startup size. It's exciting again. Yeah, on a market which is on rocket fuel. So I think it can grow quite fast. I'm sure you couldn't be in a better market. I would say so. Yeah, but that makes me think of the landscape that I'd like to go back to and see the evolution of the. Let's talk about the EV charging landscape and the EV landscape in Norway. Since you've been following it for so long, let's maybe not roll back all the way 10 years, but just how has it changed? Yeah, since after COVID. So you mentioned the pain points were appearing, but generally speaking, how has the landscape evolved the last 2-3 years instead of charging, type of chargers, speed of charging, number of stations, number of CPOs? How do you see it? Give me a bit of picture of how it has changed the last 2-3 years.
I guess the numbers of the new sales of EVs in Norway by 2024 was over 90%. And that leaves us with close to 30% penetration of EVs in the whole car stock. So there are quite a few EVs rolling on the roads in Norway now, and around the city areas, you seldom see a gasoline car anymore. That is quite fantastic. And of course, the reason for this is the strong incentives that the Norwegian government has combined the transition with. So I don't know if you want to talk more about that, but that is a quite important reason for why Norway has
the boosting. Well, I think many understand the reason. Let's hone more in really on the charging landscape. So, like type of chargers, stations, as I said, speed of charging, the offering, anything that you find interesting to mention to our listeners. Yeah, the CPOs that emerge. Are the CPOs today the same as they were 5 years ago, or how has this landscape evolved? For example, I'm really curious.
Yeah, for the fast charging stations, it hasn't changed much with the CPOs. It's still the early movers who are taking the major positions in the fast charging stations in Norway. But there are some new European entrants right now, and I registered at the Danish Viggo, or they're called Stella, right? Stella now. It's moved into Oslo.
Yeah, right.
So I think the Norwegian players are meeting competition from Europe moving forward, but that is quite new.
Yeah, and probably very healthy. Yeah, but that's quite new. Yeah, exactly. It shows that the rest of Europe is catching up and thereby starts to have the ambition. Yeah, and I think. What I heard, since we are happy to have Stella as a customer, we know a bit of the details, having met them recently. They were talking about the fact that in Oslo, it was it was an early adopter city, so there were a lot of chargers, but it was AC. So you have a big wave of installation of AC chargers back in maybe 16, 17, 18. And then at some point you realize that, you're missing DC chargers in the city. And I think this is this big shift. I don't know how do you see this shift of this urgency of deploying DC chargers, because you don't want to spend 10 hours to charge your car. You want to do it in half an hour or an hour, or top up faster. How do you see that?
I think it's a little dual perspective. For those traveling by, they want DC chargers. They want to do it fast.
Yeah.
But we also see a pattern that you really want to charge when you stop and not stop to charge.
Right.
So for those who are, and topping up is kind of a new usage pattern, which I think is becoming quite common in the Norwegian market right now, that you don't have to drive to the battery is empty and then fill it up. No. You make it drive to 50% and you fill it up 20% when you can at a AC charger.
Yeah.
So, and also remember that most Norwegians have chargers at home.
Yes.
I think that is kind of a differentiator from many of the European markets.
Potentially, yeah. If it's a home of a bit like Denmark, of really a lot of individual homes where you can have your own driveway and your own chargers, then obviously you start most of the days at 100%, right? So that reduces your need. But I guess since you're working with fleet electrification, I guess that would be part of the needs that, again, if you have some vans, they start at 100%, but during the day, if they make a break, they're not making a break of 2 hours, 3 hours, they make a quick break. I think at least that's what Stella is positioning themselves on, to offer these quick chargers to the delivery guys, to those last mile solutions, right? Do you see that also emerging?
It's definitely an important part of the solution. But we also see that the fleets are installing fast charger on their own depots, on their own home stations. So it has been expensive to do public charging as well on the DC and fast chargers. So they want to keep track of the costs.
Yeah.
So I think a combination of fast charging, home charging, and depot charging, there will always be a mix of that for the fleets.
Absolutely, yeah. That's right. Yeah, again, that. So if we look a bit more in detail into the CPO landscape, which is a key topic for us, so how could we mention the key players and how you have seen them evolve the last few years? You mentioned EVNI. Let's start with them. So you've been following for a long time. How have they been evolving? How are they doing? What do you see as their key positioning or key offering?
Well, of course, from an external view, I don't have in-depth information about the business of EVNI, but from an external perspective, it looks like they are expanding into the Scandinavian market quite well. They are both in Denmark and Sweden.
Correct. Yes.
And last year, they won some large public offerings in the German market.
Right.
And I would assume that is something they are executing on now, building new stations and so forth. So it seems like EVNI which is a utility company from Norway, basically with Norwegian operations, are now moving into to the European market quite fast. MER is more international than EVNI has been, and has been in several markets for many years. And of course, Circle K is another Norwegian player who's also an international player in the European market. Right. I think one of the things that the Norwegian players have been experiencing from the CPO side is to open up the charging system for roaming solution. It's been kind of closed systems, which has been kind of an odd thing for the Norwegian market. I think the European players didn't quite understand why the Norwegian CPOs didn't open up the stations for roaming, for instance.
Right. So then beyond those, are there any new players that have been appearing on the CPO market we could mention here?
Yeah, which is part of the Hafslund Group. And they've been focusing on heavy-duty vehicles and heavy-duty vehicle charging stations. And we also see that players like UNOX is moving fast into they've been kind of staying with the traditional gasoline stations for a long time, but now they are moving quite fast into the EV segments. And one of the reasons for this is incentives from funding incentives on heavy-duty vehicle charging infrastructure from a state-owned company called Enova, which are stimulating infrastructure builders to build for heavy-duty vehicles. Yeah,
that's clever. I mean, you need the public space, the public stakeholders to also play their part. And they saw, I mean, Norway is where it is today on passenger vehicle because there was also some solid subsidies. And if Norway wants to build their position also on e-trucks, then it's smart to also pour some public money into this. Very interesting. We'll definitely look forward to see some more e-trucks coming from Norway through Denmark, which is also becoming really much of a EV charging paradise in the future. It's looking like that also now.
Like we do with the hydropower. We also send it to Denmark.
Exactly. You send us the green power. Yeah, that's right. The big cable, which is being discussed. Yeah, that's for another episode. But that brings us to let's go in for infrastructure, since you also have knowledge about this with your long experience. So I really like another key topic and favorite topic for us is, of course, grid and flexibility. So you mentioned when we were preparing our call that it's a hot topic, and that cost of balancing the grid has tripled the past 12 months. So we talk about really exciting trend, especially when you are solving this kind of issues like as we do. So can you talk us through a bit, the evolution of the grid? What's happening? What do you see on the horizon? Yeah, what's going on?
Yeah, that's a super interesting topic. And I have to say, I was quite astonished when I'm at the board at the TSO in Statnett in Norway, and they are the system operator, and they are bearing all the cost for stabilizing the system at any time at 50 hertz. And last year we saw that the system cost for doing so tripled, as you said.
Wow.
And that's with the Norwegian system mainly based on hydropower, which is very suited for balancing
Yes.
because we have all these reservoirs too,
Yes.
which is
Which
a
you
big
can,
factor.
exactly. You can pump up and let it down and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's only in the Norwegian market. And if you go to Europe, this cost will get much, much higher because they
Yes.
don't have the hydropower.
No.
So finding good flexibility services for the grid in the future, so you don't overinvest in the grid, will be very, very important. And here there are many players who have to play a role.
Yes, absolutely. It's really emerging. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have those discussions already when you're discussing with the fleet, so e-fleet owners and managers, that this is a topic they are concerned or looking into?
Well, I don't know, not the fleet managers at the time being, because they
Okay.
are still early in their transition.
Makes sense.
So but later on, I think this will definitely be growing on them.
Yeah. So where in the EV charging market do you see the discussion of grid and flexibility taking place today in Norway? So which actors are starting to look into this seriously?
It is the key is that the system operator and the grid companies, the utilities, and we see several solutions emerging. There is a flexibility market in Norway, still in the early days, but it's getting more and more liquidity into that market, where the different players can offer flexibility services, and the buyers will be the system operator and the regional utilities. You also see a lot of bilateral agreements going on. So I think we are still in the early days, and how this product will develop is still it's hard to see what it looks like in 5 years or so.
Yeah. Okay. So that's it's a crystal ball is a bit it's dark. We can't really see. But do you see? You know how it works in Germany with the regulation that you have to have so DNO control. So we have to kind of hand at least the keys or one button that so the grid operator can with one button just shut down or at least slow down your charging. Right? Do you see how do you foresee the interaction between the EV charging stakeholders and the grid operators to evolve? You know, some tension or collaboration or expectation toward another. How do you see that?
Yeah, definitely. And you need kind of the aggregator in between, which can kind of be the counterpart to the system operator. So we see several companies trying to take position here. And the batteries in the cars is definitely a very valuable source for the flexibility market.
Yes, the batteries in the cars, absolutely, yeah. Well, again, we of course we need V2G to be really ready so it can be up and down. And a brief word on another one of our favorite topics, so battery storage. You know, so self-standing, not the cars, but you know, we're working with for example, quite close with Pixie, which is having a tremendous success as a company, right? In Norway, I saw the news as one of the fastest tech company growing, I think. Do you see that on the landscape now, to see those cabinets with chargers combined with batteries?
Yeah, we even see it in Norway, still in the early days. Again, maybe the European market is a little bit ahead of the Norwegian market here. I think it's important to know that when it comes to grid systems, the Norwegian or maybe also the Scandinavian grid systems are quite unique, because in Norway we use the grid for heating. We don't use gas. We never used gas.
Right.
Which means that the grid is quite strong to the charging box at the EV.
Right.
So batteries hasn't still been kind of a a need in the market. So
Exactly. Yeah, it's not like in Holland where today you don't get any grid access, completely congestion, but it's because again it was not calibrated for so much traffic, you could say, of electrons. But I think so there were some interesting cases with the batteries in Norway, and that connects to your point earlier about the COVID and people going on the countryside and looking for chargers. And you guys also want to take your EVs to the mountains, right? When you're going to your cabinet and skiing. So I saw some amazing projects of DC chargers in the mountains or by the seaside, and there you need batteries, otherwise you don't have enough grid, right? That's a typical case
that's
also.
true. And we also see a lot of mobile battery solutions in the Norwegian market, for example, for construction sites.
Right.
That's also where you don't want to invest in the grid during the construction period, and instead you use batteries on the construction site.
Yeah, massive batteries that you put on your construction site. Yeah, super interesting. We'll see that popping up also. We see that. Great. So if we finish a bit with a bit of a crystal ball, again, it was a bit dark on the part about the regulation and so on. But what's your take on what's going to happen the next 1, 2, 3 years in Norway in terms of EV charging markets? What do you see? What are the biggest things that are going to happen?
Well, I think the heavy-duty vehicles are coming. What our customer tells us, around 2027, 28, the growth will be taking up, be increasing. I think for Norway, due to the climate obligations we have to reduce emissions, the transport sector is key. It's definitely the biggest solution we have in the market. So I am convinced that Norway will continue the road to a fully emission-free transport sector, where electrification will be the key factor. Yes. And then also we have a lot of in transport. There was also ships and shipping, and we also see a lot of electrification within the shipping sector, together with other solutions for long shipping routes, where batteries is not the right solution. But I'm convinced that we will be emission-free within transport within the next decade.
Yeah. Do you see some CPOs opening charging hubs in the harbors for people's boats? Yeah,
absolutely. And my old company, Eviny, is also doing that. They have a company called Plug, which is offering charging solutions for the harbor all over Europe, actually. They are not only in Norway.
Okay. All right. Pioneering this, absolutely. And it's a segment also. It's interesting, that will move also to the harbors. Absolutely,
Electric boats are coming.
Yes, they are. There's some great models. Again, there are great models coming, and seen some great videos. And in terms of the CPO's landscape, do you think there could be still move from other outside of CPO to get a piece of the Norwegian market?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think what we also see is that there is a lot of players, real estate players actually, building fast charging stations. They might have real estates across different counties and a part of Norway, and they are building chains of fast charging stations. Yes. So there's not only the energy or the CPOs taking this market. There are also add-ons from real estate, which I think will play a role in the future.
Well, it makes sense because even though the charging time is faster, you need to do something while you're charging, and they have already the entertainment, I guess, right? They have whatever cafe, shops, And
a very interesting point here is that it's about 10 years ago, Mer and Eviny were running around, getting into agreements with real estate stores and so on to get charging stations on their property. Now these agreements is up for negotiation. Let's see what's happening then. I don't know. It's just
but you're right. It's absolutely. It's a clear calculation. Yeah, it's the end of a leasing phase or contract phase. So then it's up, and they can decide to do it themselves instead of having them as guests. Interesting, So, but that's always how the Norwegian market is a bit of a crystal ball for the rest of Europe because you guys started everything earlier. So that's something we're going to follow with a lot of interest. Well, thank you very much for this great conversation. There's great insights. We get a bit more clever and wise on the Norwegian EV market. Thank you, Wenche. And
Thank you.
wishing you a great day, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Well, it was a pleasure. Bye bye.
In the hot seat today, I have the pleasure to have a guest who's coming for the second time, Nils Dullum. Welcome, Nils.
Thank you, Gustav. It's great to be back. Thank you for having me.
Yes, great. Of course, you happen to have great knowledge about various markets, and after the Danish market, which we talked about some episodes ago, happy to have you again to talk about the Norwegian market. Maybe for those who didn't listen to the episode, can you please introduce yourself and give us your background?
Sure. As Gustav mentioned, my name is Nils Dullum. I work out of Denmark normally, but actually both my first and last name is Norwegian. My mother was Norwegian, so I have a special, you can say, first love with the country up north here from Denmark. So, but in the EV market back in 2009 or 8, something like that, I decided to venture into e-mobility. And first as a CPO until in 2016, having set up chargers primarily in Denmark, but also both Sweden and Norway in a cooperation with RWE, later Energy. I followed that whole technology development, backend development, software development, app development, payment development that the market went through in those early stages, and also, of course, the protocol development for, you can say, various levels of development within the industry, whether that back in the day was actual real or not. At least the work was being done, you can say, from a standardization point in many ways, not always, but in some ways, right? And then with the beginning of Ionity, pre-Ionity, I was involved in that early development stage, going from 50 kW DC, right, to installing 350 kW DC and 800 volt systems. So it's quite a big leap, in that year, 2017, 2018. And then it's evolved since then as a consultant and on various sides of the industry, both installations and maintenance, OEM side, and CPO side, of course.
Great, yeah, but that definitely qualifies you to give us some perspective since you've been involved from you could say, go back to the heydays, and in the 17, 18, there's a lot of markets which were really not moving at all, but right. Norway was always ahead. So let's start to dive into this fascinating poster child market. So how would you take us a bit through the evolution from the Norwegian EV charging markets the last, let's say 5-6 years, right? How has it evolved in terms of types of chargers, speed of charging, volumes of vehicle? Do you see maybe different waves that took place? Yes, walk us through a bit of history, please.
So you can say the stability of the incentives and the political regulations behind the EV market in Norway has been its primary strength. Nothing has been wavering. Nothing has come back and forth. It's been very consistent from the beginning. Some 10, 15 years ago, that we will support the transition to electricity, for various reasons, primarily because of course, reducing CO2, and they had a lot of air pollution issues around the capital especially. So that consistency meant that these incentives that were politically, you can say, founded and sustained in the market towards the public meant that the people could invest in EVs based upon these incentives consistently. So not in waves and not in, so you can say, a haphazard changing government inconsistencies that we see in many other markets. So from that perspective, right, Norway grew fast and early, way ahead of the rest of the markets, which was very interesting to see how also the early charge point operators that invested in the market, the local utilities, and also later on some of the fuel retailers decided to jump into this. And those were the two primary, you can say, operators of charging infrastructure that ventured into this. Startups, it's a tough one to survive. So while there has been some they have come and gone,
Yeah.
and then it's primarily those two segments that develop the infrastructure. While you can say that the amount of EVs grew consistently. So you can say waves, yes, but it's been like a consistent wave that
Yeah.
never stopped. It never ended, and to this day, it really hasn't ended. We saw last year, right? 89% of the cars sold in Norway, they were electric. I mean, 89% for the year.
Yeah.
That's pretty
Exactly.
good.
Yeah, but that says it all.
So
Yeah.
when you have a base of vehicles, right, it takes a while to get an inroad into that base of combustion engine cars when you sell electric vehicles, even if the percentage is 89%. But Norway is still, right, consistently going towards where now the total portfolio of vehicles in Norway and that are electric is 28%.
Yeah.
That's more than double any other country, behind it. So Norway keeps that, you can premise. But it also meant that in Norway, right, these developments within infrastructure, within human, you can say, population behavior and use of electricity and smart technologies and things like that have, of course, developed in Norway very consistently because the market kept growing. So you kept at it. Yet at the same time, right, Norway is an unlikely market. So it took quite a while, and it's still, you can say, difficult to see any external entrance, right, into the Norwegian market. So it's very Norwegian-centric still, which meant that when you also have a strong EV association that catches on early and you can say takes the leadership as the spokesperson or spokesorganization for the people, right, the drivers, you and me, then they also have a big influence on how do they support, you can say, the current development within Norway for this market that's growing so much faster than the rest. That also meant Norway didn't have to look at other markets, right? Because they were by far the front runner. They had their own market to support, and there really wasn't much else outside to support.
So it's because they've been really ahead? Do you think also it has something to do that they're not part of EU, also in terms of regulations and lawmaking and so on?
Nah, I don't think it has much to do with the EU. This is a political decision, basically. Yeah. In many ways, even though Norway is not part of the EU, they adhere to every single part of what the rest of the EU adhere to, under the Union, which is kind of an interesting proposition, right? So they're in, but they're not in.
Yeah.
They also, of course, have a lot of minerals, healthy economy, so they haven't been bothered much from the outside in that sense. But it meant also when they develop, they don't really need to take into consideration a lot of other developments outside of Norway because they're, comparatively speaking, from a market perspective, very small. Even if they are, you can say, substantial in many ways, like, for example, roaming, protocol development, right? Norway can run, you can say, their own ship because that's where the customers are.
Yeah, that's right.
So in that perspective, right, whatever developed in Norway, RFID access, interoperability between CPOs and things like that, didn't have to have any adherence or compatibility to anything outside of Norway. And that's in a way still how it is in Norway, actually.
So you're saying the Norwegian CPOs haven't been kind of collaborating with the platforms like Object or Girev?
Definitely not with the roaming platforms for that very same reason, yes. And I think from that perspective, right, they never had to. On the other hand, there's, you can say, of course, tourists coming to Norway, they're becoming part of a bigger wave happening now, right, of EVs proliferating throughout Europe. So it's becoming more and more obvious, right, that new developments are going to happen within the Norwegian market, on the CPO side. But actually, it hasn't really materialized yet. That's the interesting part. Of course,
they
when we developed Ionity back in the day in Norway, it was interesting to see how the technology mapping, right, and development from Ionity's side with the OEMs behind Ionity it was largely, how do you say, it wasn't quite either understood or received because they didn't have to. They really didn't have to. And I think to this day, it can still sustain itself to that degree, you know, based upon the numbers that we started with, right? 89% of the sales are EVs and 28% of the total car population so far are EVs. So we'll see how, you know, where this pans out. There's still a lot to be said about that. What is happening, right, is actually a real wave happening now, is that there are other growth markets taking over, actually notably Sweden and Denmark. Germany, as you know, had a sharp growth and then a sharp decline last year, and now it seems to be growing again. So there's some stopgap measures that's happening in other countries that, again, Norway has avoided, right? But what happened then from an investment perspective, and especially from, you say, scaling, right? When you look at a transition in the transport sector, I mean, this is a transport sector transition. If you think about that for a second, that's a pretty big word. It's easy to say, and it's not easy to do, because the transport sector as a whole is quite large. But, you know, when that sector really starts transitioning, right, you will see dynamics change in the market. We're not there yet, but it's coming. And that means that what was before the central point and the natural gathering point throughout Europe for everything EV, Norway is changing. Norway is already in a growth phase, right? Back in the economic theory days, right? We went from the initial markets to the growth phase, and they're way into the growth phase, which means you can say the newness or the opportunities, that window, at least in the initial growth phase, have now moved into a much more of a mature phase in Norway. So you have to be aware of that if you want to, you can say, go into the Norwegian market. So subsequently, when you're talking about investments, new technologies, they typically tend to get into earlier stage markets, right? Because they can have bigger penetrations from the beginning. Yeah. So that's what Norway is suffering from currently. Meanwhile, they have their bubble development, from the last 10 years.
So are you saying that the local players have it for themselves, but thereby also there's a lack of external or a new fresh blood coming to the market, Definitely. Money and ideas and capitals and so on?
Yeah. There's been some movements in the market, of course, right, between the two major stakeholders, which is oil, gas, and fuel and oil, and then or liquid fuel, we call it, and utility. Some of them have divested, right? Fortum was big with Charge and Drive, and what was called Fortum Charge and Drive, they divested, right? It's now an equity investment fund that owns it. They now, you can say, have to scale on a different premise, and it's actually not really, I don't see it happening yet. We'll see how that goes. But they're still only right in Norway and Sweden. Yeah. So, you see Uno X, right, which has traditionally, as a fuel retailer, been Norwegian and Danish. If they can sustain it, they have other businesses, so they can combine stuff and be stronger that way. But, scaling is the next 10 years within e-mobility, to be one of, you can say, the winners in 10, 15, 20 years down the road, when a lot more of Europe and the transport sector as a whole has transitioned to electricity.
Yeah. So are you saying that a CPO in 10, 15 years cannot be alive if it's not pretty international? I mean, you cannot be just a national CPO in Norway and having a good business, right? We agree on that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's so it's not because you come out of Norway that you have a clear path to win in Europe in the next 10, 15 years, right?
Not anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a quite interesting challenge. So, okay. So what, so that alluded some of the challenges that they're facing. Are there other structural challenges that the CPO are facing? What about the grid? tell us a bit about the grid in Norway, right? So what's the state? I mean, we know that they have 98% of green electricity, abundant with the hydro. But tell us a bit about the macro view of the grid and the electricity system.
So, I mean, they have a different electricity system in Norway compared to the rest, right? And it's typically single-phased, or what's called IT. But they're going, you can say they have special installations, of course, for three-phase setups. But they early on also acknowledged that from the DSO side, right, the distribution system operators, and the TSO, so the transmission system operator, right, the high voltage grid supplier, but also the local grids companies, they had to take early measures to understand the impact and then act accordingly. So, and you do that, right, with penalties, right? Basically, you levy tariffs, it's called, right, which is like just a higher price at certain hours for certain types of
to shift consumption to the better
consumption, right? And they've been very good at working on this from that perspective, that they both can educate the customers, by raising prices at certain times, making people change behavior accordingly. And I will say this, from that technology perspective, there's been a couple of notable technology company growths coming out of that, which is interesting. But that's simply because the early rise in Norway also, you can say, opened the doors for these technologies from that perspective, that they could grow with a volume base and survive, you can say, these early growth phases from a startup perspective. And they do that with tariffs to actually control the load and to distribute it quite well already. And from a commercial perspective, when we talk about commercial transport at some point here, it's the same, right? The time of use tariffs, but also the you can say the peak tariffs, right, that you hit, which are retroactive. If you hit a certain level, means that the market, you can say, starts understanding from a cost perspective what that means and act accordingly, so to speak, right?
Right. So do you see that reflected in tariffs at so to speak, on the signs of the charging stations and dynamic prices?
Public is public. You don't care as a driver, right? That's for the CPO to deal with on a larger scale. From a personal vehicle perspective, it's all the way down to whether you charge at 1 or 3 phases. I mean, there are different tariffs for all of that. So how long you let your load stay on the grid for charging electric vehicles impacts the cost. From a macro perspective, from the CPOs, right, this is something they have to factor into the cost of doing business. And then they have to be able to curtail it to the point where, and this is the interesting part, right, where how much peak load will they allow at a location? Of course, one, depending on how much capacity they bought altogether for that location. But two, also to curtail those peak load hours. If they're very few, right, when you hit peak loads, it's retroactive. That peak load tariff is retroactive throughout the year.
Yes.
That can become very costly for that one time you hit the peak load.
Yeah. Like in Germany, same regulation, yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's the same everywhere. But you can say in Norway, it became apparent early, and the DSOs, levying tariffs, you can say that are quite high already, means that you feel the impact immediately as a CPO. You want to understand this, because otherwise you can't control cost.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So if we just take a second, go back to the history, the timeline of rollout and the technology being deployed. So Norway started early, so a lot of AC, starting out, I guess. So how has the landscape, so the chargers you actually see on the street that Norwegian EV driver can make use of, how has that evolved? What's happening?
Very early on, the city of Oslo, as the capital, went in and supported the whole development of public charging infrastructure with AC charging poles, as you mentioned, right? And it proliferated quite quickly, also because parking was free within the capital city for that very reason, for EVs, and also when you were charging. And to be fair, right, the charging prices were also quite attractive. So from that perspective, there's a lot of, again, financial incentives to drive electric. That said, we're seeing now the proliferation put a load on, you can say, getting to a charging station, which means that DC, right, the faster charging, is suddenly in high demand. Because now it's all about convenience. You need to charge, you need to have it done so that you're ready the next day with a battery that can go the distance that you want. Whereas finding an AC pole where you can be for many hours, but becoming more and more, you can say, difficult as more and more vehicles came into the market, that needed charging. That means also the charging operators all of a sudden are investing in fast charging, so DC infrastructure in the cities. And this was a wave, absolutely a new wave that's actually very recent, where you have urban area as the central focus for fast charging, which was never thought of just 5-8 years ago as something that would ever be happening, to be honest. But it's certainly the new focus for some, and it will be for many of them to get into urban areas with fast charging. Because even though the investment is higher, right, it's like a restaurant. You can turn tables faster during the evening. Yeah, you can turn vehicles through, right? You can churn vehicles and make more money. So I think AC is more or less financially, to say this, dead in the water from that perspective. Because you can never recoup the cost relative to the amount of time the car has to sit there and charge at the price that you can charge the driver. Whereas DC, it's a little different, right? You get the service that you expect in a short period of time. You're willing to pay a little bit more for it, and you can churn more customers and subsequently sell more kilowatt hours from a CPO. So it's a natural development.
Yeah, I hope that a lot of city planners are listening also to the podcast, more down south, and not getting too hyped up and deploying. I mean, like I see, in Copenhagen, I've seen that, right? You've seen that also. You're also in Copenhagen sometime. You've seen how many slow chargers that have been installed and are being pulled on the streets like new parking stops, and it's just changing the landscape. And then maybe in 10 years, we're going to be like, what is all this mess now, right? We didn't need that when we could have a couple of DC chargers around the blocks. Again, as you say, with a high yield. So interesting perspective that we learned from Norway, And a note, congratulations to Stella, which we know quite well, Stella Energy, who won a contract, Danish CPO in Oslo with a fast charger. So that's the rise of the urban fast charging. So if we talk about fast charging, and let's go to last topic on the MCS, let's push the kilowatts, right? And talk about, so how is Norway doing with the rise of e-trucks across Europe and across the world, but especially in Europe, we're doing really well. I think the European manufacturers, OEMs this time are really ready also for the trucks. So how is it, does Norway have the same head start, like really far ahead of the rest of Europe, or how do you see that?
Let's make sure we make a clear distinction here, because the personal vehicle markets, which is what we've discussed so far, is everything we went through. Yes. Now, when we move on to trucks, we're going into a commercial segment.
Yes.
The commercial vehicle segment actually is very different, has very different needs from the personal car segment, even though right now it's not, readily acknowledged, right? Because we're in such an early phase with commercial traffic. But it will become more and more apparent that these two are very separate and will have separate development paths for sure, which means also the infrastructure will separate majorly. That said, Norway, again, right, and the city of Oslo even, has been very early on in their incentives towards commercial trucks, infrastructure. So even the city of Oslo held a tender last year or a year before that had 5 notable winners, for truck charging within city limits. I mean, we're starting within capital city limits for commercial traffic. So this goes back to where the cities actually have huge impact when they set restrictions on what can be driven commercially within city limits. So when they have environmental zones and they set this structure up where delivery of goods can only happen by electric propulsion, then they have to support the infrastructure to do that also, which was exactly what they did. So we see that coming in Norway. We see vans, although the light duty vehicle segment on commercial vehicles is still year or two out really happening, but certainly Norway again has been a front runner on this. The charging infrastructure is now focused on trucks, and you can say trucks are very expensive, right, compared to diesel trucks. So there's a huge gap when you take 3 times the price for an electric truck versus a diesel truck. It takes major incentives to make that switch. Now, because Norway is so far ahead, you see that switch both on the SMB side, right? So small transport companies are transitioning or buying at least or getting into electric trucks. So we have a development just like the personal vehicles in Norway, where it starts small and then it grows from there. What makes Norway special is that they get the first experiences with a small segment, right? Which also means that the capacity requirements and the infrastructure requirements, you can say, doesn't have to follow quite as quickly, because when you have a transporter who has 1 or 2 electric trucks or maybe even 3, right. They take care of their routes, they take care of their own charging infrastructure, and then they plan accordingly.
So now, are you saying that they're charging mostly at the depot, so they don't really charge en route?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the longer routes, I think, from a truck perspective and from a cost perspective, hasn't really started yet in Norway either. And I'm not even sure Norway is going to be the front runner on that one because, trucks, that transition to electric trucks and the cost, both on the infrastructure side, the capacity needed to charge the trucks and the trucks themselves, right, 3 times up the price, means that the smaller transport companies are going to have challenges rising to the occasion, right, from that cost perspective. It's simply not part of their business to have that kind of investment.
Yeah, right. And I guess you could say the long haul traffic you can look at. I'm pretty sure that, I don't think, not being nationalistic here, but I think Denmark probably will have more, en route truck charging than Norway, because Denmark is more at the crossroad between the north and the south, right? So there will be more long haul e-trucks.
Yeah, but you can say from that perspective, EU certainly has been the main proponent of making sure that commercial traffic along the corridors is established from an public infrastructure perspective. So you've seen the investments going along the corridors now in the last 2 years, right, based on EU regulation and support. And I think from that perspective, this is going to help all the markets, and Norway has done the same, right? Even though they're not part of the EU, they held their own tenders to cover the corridors in Norway as well. So that will happen, but who is going to use that infrastructure? It is not the local transport company that has a local market that they serve, right? It is large logistics companies that will go out and buy 50, 100, 200 electric trucks at a time and electrify certain routes and then proliferate from there. So we're moving from a traditional SMB market to the complete opposite.
Yeah, so there will be a lot of focus on depot charging again.
Depot is one thing, right? Hub charging, right, where the logistics centers are outside the cities, right, to load and unload. So you'll have the corridors covered, right, with public infrastructure, which means that those routes can actually start happening. But it's also, there will be regulations also for how you now deliver this within the cities, both from driving electric to the size of the vehicles and the time of day they can drive into the city, right? So you'll see logistics centers proliferate based on this notion that you support the long distance, the corridor traffic, and then you unload to distribute within the cities. This is actually the same thing happening for commercial harbors. We've seen it in the US actually. It's called drayage, right? Where the harbors put requirements on who can drive or what they can drive within the cities, loading and unloading containers. And typically then they take the containers out of the harbor driving electric trucks. And then they take them to central hubs where they're then picked up by bigger trucks and then
for the long haul. Yeah.
This is happening. This will happen in Europe as well.
Yeah. exciting opportunity. Absolutely. Also, again for the ecosystem.
And the CPOs.
Yes, exactly. And for CPOs, absolutely opportunities to grab here to be present on those locations. So for those who are curious to keep following the Norwegian market a bit more in details, would you give us a bit of your list of exciting companies within the EV charging ecosystem or energy ecosystem that you would recommend to follow?
Definitely, right. I think it's interesting to see how the market ownership of the CPOs have changed over time, right? Some of the original shareholders, right, utilities, liquid fuel, they'll continue, but some of them also divested, and was taken over by, especially on the commercial side, we see now a rise in equity investors, so venture capital. As you know, equity investors, right, are looking at short-term investments, quick payoff, and onwards they go. That shift came. It will disappear, pull out quickly, and the long-term investments, capital, same thing, venture capital, but different scope of, you can say, longevity investments. That kind of money is coming in. So pension funds money is coming in to support this, over the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years even, right? Which also means that you will see these cross-border rollout of networks, whether it's acquisitions, which will happen as well, it's consolidations, which is already happening a little bit. There'll be some fallouts, right? It's also happening in our commercial traffic already. And you'll see, how do you say, it's not a good word, it's such a non-English word, but you'll see current CPOs now putting themselves up for sale, up for different investment capital, up for consolidations as well as acquisitions. If you don't go the acquisition way, you're looking at trying to be acquired. Let's put it that way. Because either you scale, especially for commercial business, because the cost is dramatically higher, right? But the payoff will as well, which means there's much more money in that game than we realize. And it's coming in. So I think the latest, so I see Charge and Drive, with their investment structure right now or ownership structure right now, they either have to scale up on the capital side, which is anybody's guess, but if they don't, right, that is up for an acquisition. So this is the kind of stuff that's happening in the market. MEA, if you know MEA, which was a utility based and still to this day is owned by Statkraft. They've been acquired companies to get into the market in the UK and in Germany, and that's been their way to proliferate, right? They also acquired in Sweden, and they built, you can say, a growth base on that. Now, will they continue, or will they divest and find a buyer for the fact that they now have 4 markets, maybe 5, right, that they can offer to someone who's ready to scale?
To scale and consolidate,
Yeah, this is interesting. You see someone like Evenu, which is also a local utility on the west coast of Norway, right, building a semi-ambitious international network, first being one of the 3 big ones in Norway, venturing into Sweden, into Denmark. They won a big tender in Germany.
Yes, right.
Tall order for a small utility in Norway.
Impressive.
Yep.
Good. That's great names to follow. Thanks. Right. Well, then on that note, I'll thank you for your input, and we'll anyway share your LinkedIn profile in the show notes for those who want to get in touch with you. If you're curious about Norway, definitely Nils knows a thing or two, as you could hear. So thank you, Nils.
Thank you.
And see you next time for another topic. Bye.
Definitely. Take care.
In this long episode about the Norwegian EV charging market, and in the hot seat now I have Andreas Kirkerod from EY Norway. Thank you for joining us, Andreas. I maybe will just start with an introduction. Can you please tell us your origin story? So what led you to the position where you're at today?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me on the podcast. It's a pleasure to be here and to be considered an EV charging expert. So, as you mentioned, my name is Andreas Kirkrod, and I work as a strategy and transaction consultant at EY, or EVA Parthenon for those who is familiar with that brand. And I'm responsible for the subsector group we call Electrification, covering the Nordics. That includes EV charging. So, of course, coming from Norway, I started out in oil and gas way back. But after joining EY in 2015, after just a couple of years, started focusing on the charging market and has been my core sector focus since then.
Yeah, I heard some of your key projects back then include being involved in the deployment of Ionity.
Yes, that was the first big one.
Yeah, that's not a small one, and definitely interesting background you're bringing today. So, yeah, so how can you, let's take a little bit of a history as a local and as an EV expert. So how has the Norwegian EV charging market evolved, would you say, the past 4 or 5 years, types of chargers, speed of charging, vehicles, etc.? Tell us what are the major things that have happened?
Yeah, so to take it back, the Norwegian EV charging market has, as you know, seen significant growth. Some say it's been boosting over the past few years. And it has, to be honest. It all started with, a lot of slow chargers. But as the increase of EV went up, the demand for fast and more efficient charging solutions grew. And this, of course, led to the rise of installation of fast chargers and ultra-fast chargers. The volume of vehicles has increased substantially. And in 2024, actually 9 out of 10 passenger cars that are sold in Norway were battery electric. So that's incredible. And Oslo, where I live, has the highest EV density, and there are electric cars everywhere. Passenger cars, but also commercial cars are starting to get electric, and it is expected later this year that probably on the passenger car side, more than 50% of all cars in Oslo will be BEVs.
Wow. 50. Every second car on the road, on any parking lot, on any retail supermarkets, parking will be a BEV. Yeah, exactly. Impressive. Yeah. And so how is the rise of fast charging, the fast charging landscape? Tell us a bit, how is that developed the last few years?
Okay, so I think we have around 4,500 public charging stations in Norway. And there's always a lot of talk about fast chargers, but the Type 2 chargers are the most common at the public charging stations. So as of December 24, of around 30,000 public charge points, I think, close to 18,000 were AC, but nearly half of those were Type 2 with at least 22k of speed.
Yeah, and do you recognize this hypothesis that because, again, you are also a nation of homeowners, so a lot of Norwegian people have their own driveway and their own charge at home, so that decreases the need for fast charging hubs?
So I don't have the numbers on the wall charger for homes, but if I had that, I would believe that's a very high number. But again, as we now see, everything is transitioning more into commercial vehicles. Then there's it's a shift in the demand because I personally believe, and of course having an EV, I believe that I should not be needing to use public charging because I want to charge the car when it's resting. And when I say resting, it's, either when I'm sleeping or you're at the office. So when the car is just parked and it should be slow charging, right? Or smart charging.
Absolutely.
But the shift is changing. And also, when I'm out driving to go skiing, etc., there's a different need. If it's cold, you might, need fast charging sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So so then let's dive into commercial EV charging with you, shall we? So last mile versus long haul. So what are the differences in development pace? Tell us a bit about what you see happening.
Yeah, so commercial, it's a hot topic, and we're starting to see more electric trucks on the roads in Norway. And this, as we know, it requires bigger sites, more robust charging infrastructure, and the policymakers are now focusing on actually this electrifying for commercial vehicles. And the specific focus they have, or at least their ambitions, is around the commercial vans, which then is more like delivery trucks. The ambition was to have 100% sale of electric by 2025. That's this year. I will get back to some numbers on that. The public transportation ambition is 28, and then you have heavy trucks, which then is 2030. And of course, the development pace for last mile and long haul is very different. Last mile delivery vehicles operates within cities, quicker adoption, charging infrastructure mostly at depots, drive shorter distances and less range issues. But this not only is for electric vans, because we also see a lot of fully sized trucks being electric in Oslo. Some examples there could be, we have some grocery store chains, they use electric trucks for distributing to stores. Also garbage trucks. And also we see within the construction segment that a lot of the trucks, moving materials around are now electric.
Absolutely, yeah. So do you see, I personally saw, because they are one of our happy customers, Stella from Copenhagen, expanding, they won a small tender in the Oslo area. So when I heard that, Oslo was ahead in, a lot of slow chargers, but now suddenly exactly because of commercial needs, then that's not cutting it. You need fast chargers also.
Yes, and that's very important, and it's for everything. In Oslo now, for taxis, actually, I think it was November last year, it's now a ban to have a fossil fuel taxi. And some of the taxi drivers I talk with say that it's sufficient for them to charge at home and then go to work and charge when they get home back. But also it kind of depends on what kind of routes you do. If you have to go a lot to the airport, etc., then they need to fast charge. So they also need a lot of more charging there.
Obviously, yeah.
But just to revisit on what I was saying on the 2025 ambition for the commercial vans.
Yes,
because
please.
the number in 2024, then the sale was only 30%. That was electric. So they are a bit behind.
Yeah.
But we've seen, maybe they have to revise some of their ambitions. At least we've seen a lot of the OEMs has done that lately, changing the numbers. But to speed things up, they're trying to work hard to make it happen. Yes. And the Oslo City Council, they have proposed a ban on fossil fuel vans within Ring 2. So that's like the central area of Oslo.
Yeah.
And that ban will apply to all commercial vehicles that run on petrol or diesel.
But that's interesting. That's really
business, right.
That's a classic, classic move. You can a policy like the ZE emissions in the UK, right? The zero emission zones, right? That's also driving transformation. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. And so also, what's more?
And also they use a lot of the same. Because all the tools they used for passenger cars, like private people, they kind of pulling some of them back, and then they're moving them into commercial. So that would count for the bus lane. Now they're talking about opening that for commercial electric transportation, and also on when it comes to tolls, road tolls, that they will get exemption from that. So they're trying to use the tools that they have to incentivize. But I think the 2025 ambition should be difficult for commercial vans, but I think we will get there one day. And also another funny thing, since we are in Norway and we're quite high up north, we get snow, right? And for example, the Norwegian Postal Service, they have a requirement that the vehicles should have 4x4 drive. And so they've kind of been waiting for the right vehicle because there hasn't really been that many electric vans with 4x4 drive. But now with the ID bus, I think that has changed a lot, and the ID bus is all over Oslo. So it must be the most selling electric van at at least lately in Norway.
Yeah. Okay. Well, they must be clapping in their hands at the Volkswagen HQ. Yeah. They definitely need a bit of tailwind. So that's a good news for them. Okay.
Yeah.
And well, the question is like, how can Norway stay ahead of the rest of Europe as it is on passenger car, or will it ever stay ahead on commercial vehicle? Do you think it has a head start and can maintain it, or do you think it's a different wave? And of course, the rest of Europe is closer this time. How do you see it?
So the Norwegian government, they've been very proactive in supporting EV charging infrastructure. Norway has certainly been ahead of the rest of Europe, especially in terms of passenger EVs. And I think that this is extending to commercial EVs as well. Yeah. So with, at least in Oslo, with 60% of the global emission coming from the transport sector, the only way to reduce emission in our cities is to boost green shift in transportation.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I actually recently visited World of Volvo in Gothenburg and got to examine their battery electric truck. And that's, that is available now. But discussing with different OEMs, they state that, even though the vehicle is ready, demand has been slow. And this is linked due to lack of infrastructure and the need to provide sufficient power, making range a concern, right, for the customers.
Yeah.
So it feels a bit like the chicken and egg situation, similar to, as you mentioned, Ionity, when we worked on Ionity back in 2017. Then the OEMs had to make significant investments to move things forward. I think we're a bit here now, but in Norway, at least, we have something called Enova, which is very important to build out the infrastructure. And Enova is the Norwegian government's toolbox for meeting our climate commitments.
Yeah.
So initially, the focus was on supporting charging for commercial vehicles at depots, which they've done up until now. And I think they supported around 1,800 charge points. But now Enova has shifted focus to support infrastructure along highways. And that should be very interesting to see how that's going to speed up the build out of infrastructure.
Yeah, but for sure, I mean, this requires another planning, which can be more efficient. It is also about the role of Norway in the European infrastructure. So, which long haul, trucks are going to go from Norway to the rest of Southern Europe, right? And which are which kind of commercial vehicles will stay within Norway and have different needs because they're not maybe the same long haul, and there's a depot charging. So there's still a lot of moving targets. In the challenges you mentioned, so the right vehicle. So you were mentioning the lack of 4x4, for example, 4-wheel drive for being a brake to adoption. Are there any other challenges you see for commercial charging or any opportunities you want to mention to round up on this topic?
There are, of course, challenges because the sale of electric trucks and vans are still low. And it's moving slowly, but I think it's moving in the right direction. And now in 25, we can, in the best case scenario, expect close to probably 20% of new trucks sold in Norway being electric. Mm-hmm. So it's a long way to go, but the ambition there is 2030. So, but again, the challenges will include ensuring the grid can handle the increased load and addressing the high cost associated with installing the chargers. But still, there's also opportunities in this, and that that's development of smart charging solutions and the integration of renewable energy sources into the charging network. And this, Christoph, this is where you come in, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what we do. Absolutely. Yeah. The more density, the better. Great. Yeah. So there was an interesting topic when we prepared, we discussed, which is a bit specific to Norway, given the huge coastline and being a maritime country. But I think it's also spreading. And talking about this business opportunity of harbour charging. So we talked about Oslo and we talked about this Stella station, which is also close to the harbour. So tell me a bit about your thoughts. What do you see in terms of commercial boats, with those first zero emissions harbours you were mentioning? So in some projects that EY has worked on, please give us a bit of your view on this.
Absolutely. Harbour charging is an exciting new segment in the EV charging industry. Commercial boats, ferries, they're starting to transition to electric power. But this requires robust charging infrastructure at harbors.
Yeah.
And in addition, we have a lot of cruise ships that are visiting Norway, and they, for now, mostly use shore power, so that it's not too much local pollution when they're at port. And we've done some projects on this, and we looked at different business cases, and there's many of them, but probably the most interesting cases I could mention, as I said, shore power. That's it's there, but it's been there for a long time. The first one was established in 2011 at the port at Kristiansand, so it's been there for a long time. We see charging of ferries and ships. We have more than 100 electric ferries in operation in Norway today. And the power they require, it's enormous. And also, you're mentioning Stella again, and we also see that at harbors a lot of heavy-duty trucks go there. So there's a huge potential for charging of trucks as well. It makes sense. Also, there's also a lot of space there, so it's easy to set up. Other things are local industry, workboats. We have a lot of fish farming in Norway, and they want to stay ahead, so they transitioning to electric boats.
Of course.
And all the other things, with the space, solar park, energy storage, flexibility solution, all that's kind of relevant in the mix at harbors. So that's incredibly interesting and exciting going forward to see how that's going to develop. And of course, we have Enova on that as well, having a lot of active programs to support the build out. But we are still, I think we are past planning phase, but it's still a long way to go when it comes to electrifying ships.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. But it has to be zero emission boating also. That's for sure. That's part of the solution.
Yeah. Or hybrids. Hybrids, because the biggest ships are going to go very far distances. We can only require that they go electric, maybe, to the port, and then they can fuel up the dirty diesel when they're out on the ocean.
Correct. Correct, yeah, for the transition hybrid, yeah. But I know I'm thinking of the pleasure boating, or as you said, the ferries can easily be electric. And as you said, imagine the capacity they have on board as a big batteries when they are at the harbor, right? And maybe not sailing until next morning. It's a giga battery that you can use for the village, which is part of the harbor, right? So interesting opportunities for sure. We'll share if you will, we can share the research or the work that IAO has done on this. Happy to put a link in the note shows. Great. So to round off and have a couple of names from you. So who is active on the e-trucks, on the heavy duty or commercial fleet charging that you're following?
So there's a lot of exciting stuff happening there. We have the big players like Mere, Recharge, Circle K, SD1, but also there's a lot of new entrants focusing on providing tailored solutions for commercial fleets. So this is exciting, and looking forward to following this going forward.
All right. Well, and then people can connect with you on LinkedIn. We'll share a link to your profile and follow you and see what you're sharing. So thank you very much, Andreas, for taking the time for this first time on the podcast. And wishing you a great afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And that wraps up this deep dive into the Norwegian EV charging market. We've explored what makes Norway a global leader in electric mobility, consistent policies, early investments, and a strong homegrown charging ecosystem. But we've also uncovered the challenges ahead. With Nils Dullum, we learn how Norway's stable incentives and early infrastructure development set the foundation for mass EV adoption, yet the lack of international players in the market raises questions about future innovation and competition. Wenche, CEO and founder of Found Energy, highlighted the growing pains of a mature EV market where fleets and commercial vehicles are now driving demand. And while Norway once led the charge, its slow uptake in fleet electrification and the need for more fast-charging solutions could leave room for other countries to catch up. Andreas from EY Norway brought in the big picture how commercial EV adoption, electric trucking, and even harbour charging are reshaping the landscape. So while Norway is pushing ambitious targets with policies like the Oslo fossil fuel ban for taxis and vans, it's clear that infrastructure gaps and high costs still pose challenges. So, will Norway maintain its edge as the world's EV capital? Or will other European markets, with growing commercial EV adoption and massive infrastructure investment, start to close the gap? Well, one thing is certain. The next phase of the EV revolution won't just be about passengers' cars. It will be about fleets, logistics, and heavy transports. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the ChargePoint podcast. If you enjoyed it, as always, don't forget to subscribe and share and connect with us for more insights into the future of EV charging. And please leave us a review on the platform of your choice. That would really help us. Until next time, keep charging forward and drive safely.